Ezekiel 33:3.
So welcome to Wednesday Bible Studies. My name is Jason. We'll be covering Genesis chapters 30 to 35. So the agenda for today is we'll do a review from last week. We'll do an overview of Genesis chapters 30 to 35. Any questions from either this week or last week, and then we'll do an assignment of reading for the next week. So our review from last week. Abraham has his servants swear an oath to find his son Isaac a wife from amongst his relatives in Haran. The servant prays to God, requesting that the woman who offers water to both he and his camels to be the wife of Isaac, chosen by the Lord. Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, son of Nahor, offers water to both the servant and the camels, then is taken back to Isaac after the story is related to Laban. Abraham marries Keturah. This is his third wife. Abraham gives all he has to Isaac, dies at 175 years of age, and is buried within a cave at Machpelah beside his wife Sarah. After the death of Abraham, Isaac resided near Beer Lahai Roi. Ishmael lived for 137 years, residing between Havilah to Shur. Rebekah was barren. Isaac prayed for her, and she gave birth to the twins Jacob and Esau, also known as Edom. Edom was born with red skin and hairy, and he was different than any other child that was born before him. Esau grew up to be a hunter, and Jacob preferred to remain amongst the tents where he lived. The Lord tells Isaac to stay in Gerar because of a famine. Isaac deceives King Abimelech into believing Rebekah is his sister, and the king gives his wife back, and Isaac grew greatly in prosperity while living in the land. King Abimelech saw the power of Isaac was great and asked Isaac to leave them. Isaac moves into the valley of Gerar and found 3 wells. The wells of Esek and Sitnah were fought over, but the third well, Rehoboth, was not. And Rehoboth, translated, means God has made space for us, or the Lord has made space. Then we see King Abimelech and his military commander Phicol request a peace treaty from Isaac, seeing how powerful he has become in their land, and Isaac agrees. And then Esau marries 2 Hittite women and grieves his parents. And then we see that Jacob tricks his father Isaac with help of his mother and pretending to be his brother Jacob tricks his father Isaac with the help of his mother, pretending to be his brother Esau, and then takes his blessing. And then Esau planned to kill his brother, and his mother Rebekah knew, so she encouraged Jacob to go to Haran. Isaac calls for Jacob and commands that he goes to Paddan Aram in Haran to live, so he can find a wife from his relatives to avoid the wrath of Esau. When Esau heard of his parents' displeasure, he married Malhath, an Ishmaelite. Jacob, on the way to Paddan Aram, had a vision of a ladder with angels ascending and descending, followed by a blessing that Jacob would have many descendants. Jacob vowed the God of his father Isaac would be his God if he protected him, clothed him, and brought him back home safely. Jacob arrives in Paddan Aram and meets Rachel, who introduces him to Laban. Jacob works for Laban for 7 years to have the hand of Rachel in marriage. Laban tricks Jacob and brings the older daughter Leah to Jacob's tent. Jacob works for another 7 years for Rachel. The Lord saw Leah was not loved and caused Rachel to be barren. Leah gave birth to Reuben, then Simeon, then Levi, and then Judah. And now we start our overview of Genesis chapters 30 to 35. Starting with Genesis chapter 30. So we start now with Jacob living in Haran. In Genesis 31-2, it says, when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, give me children, or I shall die. Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? If we take a look at this family tree here, starting from Abraham, we'll go Abraham to Sarah, to Isaac, to Rebekah, and now to Jacob, where we're looking at our story. So what happened now is we have Jacob, and he has the older sister Leah. He has 4 children with her. So Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Rachel was the woman that he met when he first came up to Paddan Aram. Rachel is who Jacob loves. The older sister who was put into Jacob's tent instead of the younger sister because Laban tricked Jacob. So here we have Rachel grieving because her older sister has 4 children and she's still barren. In Genesis 30:3, then she said, "Here's my servant Bilhah. Go into her, that she may give birth on my behalf, that even I may have children through her." So at this point, Rachel feels desperate, and so she gives her maidservant. And her maidservant Bilhah is now who brings on children on behalf of Rachel. So Bilhah brings Dan and Naphtali. These are the next 2 children. Then in Genesis 39-10, we read, when Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Then Leah's servant Zilpah bore a son. So we can see what's going on here. There's a war going on between the 2 ladies where they're both fighting to basically have more sons for Jacob. And so now with the contest going over to the maidservant of Rachel, now Leah is going to involve her maidservant. And so now Leah gives her maidservant Zilpah to be a wife for Jacob. So you can see here, the polygamy isn't even actually necessarily coming through the husband. He's just agreeing with what the wives and maidservants have decided. So then Zilpah has the 2 children, Gad and Asher. In Genesis 30:14-15, we read, in the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes as well? Rachel said, then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes. Okay, so let's look at this here. We have a situation where first we see that Reuben is the child of Leah. And so Reuben has come back with mandrakes. And Rachel is asking Leah for her son's mandrakes. But look at what the language is here. It says, is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? So then this would be Leah speaking to Rachel. So Leah is saying to Rachel that you have taken away my husband. Why would Leah be saying that? Because Leah is consciously aware that Rachel is loved more by Jacob. And so that's why she makes the comment, are you going to take my husband as well as my son's mandrakes? So Reuben's mandrakes, this is what a mandrake looks like. Mandrake in Hebrew is dude. If you take a look, you'll see it comes from the word dod. Dod has meanings of uncle or love or beloved. Now, it gives you a hint as to what the mandrake was used for and what this was all about. When we talk about love and beloved and we're referring to the mandrake, what we're actually referring to is the fact that the mandrake was thought to be an aphrodisiac. So if we take a look here, Old Dominion University says, the mandrake, also known as Mandragora ophilinus, is a strange plant mentioned only in Genesis 30:14 and the Song of Psalms in 7:13, although it is a common plant in many parts of Israel. As the Bible so accurately describes, the mandrake often grows as a weed in the wheat fields. The plant consists of several large, wrinkled, dark green leaves that lie flat upon the ground for forming a rosette. In the center of this rosette, a cluster of attractive purple flowers appears in the winter. The root of the mandrake may be several feet long and weigh several pounds. It has a bizarre, often human-like shapes, and for this reason is highly regarded by the superstitious. The fruits, as noted in the Song of Songs, are produced in the early summer and have a very attractive fragrance. So here's some illustrations of a mandrake. And on the far right-hand side, this is actually like a magical scroll. So the mandrake was looked at as something magical. But if you take a look at the mandrake's roots, you can see where they started to get the idea of personifying the mandrake as an individual. So sometimes you see it as a male or a female. This is from the Wise Mag. Due to its properties, the plant was believed to have a mysterious power, and the resemblance of its roots to a human body was taken as evidence for this. This led to its sympathetic sorcery. It is believed that consuming its yellow fruits brings sexual energy and fertility to both men and women. In several cultures, eating the fruits is seen as a guarantee of becoming pregnant. The roots, however, were carried as an amulet to symbolize fertility. It is maybe because of this belief that the goddess of beauty and lust, Aphrodite, is also known as Magdronitis. The Ionians, which are the Greeks, named the plant mandragore. In the famous epic Odysseus, Circe casts a spell on the Argonauts using the mandrake. So here we can see this was used in ancient cultures as a method of becoming pregnant. So it's a fertility symbol, it's an aphrodisiac. So now you can start to see why exactly Rachel wanted the mandrake. Rachel believed that the mandrake would help her become pregnant because she was barren. So mandrakes were believed to be fertility drugs in the ancient world. Leah's child Reuben had the mandrakes, and Rachel wanted them to get pregnant. So if we take a look here, we can see Leah had a child called Reuben, and it's Rachel that wants the mandrakes that Reuben has. In Genesis 30 and 15, but she, which is Leah, said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you also take away my son's mandrakes?" Rachel said, "Then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes." So the deal that's going on here is Rachel wants to get pregnant. So Rachel says, "You know what, Leah, I will give you Jacob for the evening, and in return, you give me the mandrakes." So Rachel sold her husband Jacob to Leah in exchange for mandrakes to get pregnant. Genesis 30, 16 to 17. When Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he lay with her that night, and God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. So you can see the situation here kind of backfired, obviously, on Rachel, because Rachel is looking to redeem herself by having a son, having a child. She's barren. And in this situation here, she ends up actually prostituting Jacob because she sells Jacob literally to Leah. And then it backfires on her because Leah ends up having another child. You can see the difference between when God commands something versus when people try to take it on their own hands. It always backfires. So here we can see that Leah has another child. This other child is Issachar. So Jacob and Leah have another child. Rachel is still barren. Genesis 30, 19 to 21. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a sixth son. And then Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me, because I have borne him six sons." So she called his name Zebulun. Afterwards, she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. So now Leah has six children, and Rachel has none. And clearly the mandrakes didn't work. So Leah, six sons, one daughter, and two sons through her servant. So Leah has provided Jacob with eight sons and one daughter. So nine children total. And then Rachel, two sons through her servant. So she herself is still barren. But then Rachel decides she's going to pray. Genesis 30, 22 to 24. Then God remembered Rachel and listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, "God has taken away my reproach." And she called his name Joseph, saying, "May the Lord add to me another son." So she isn't saying that the mandrakes worked. She's giving credit to God. So obviously the mandrakes, it was just a waste of time. The problem why her womb was sealed had to do with something from above. So now Rachel has her first child, which is Joseph. In Psalms 113:9, we can actually see some piece of this where it says, "He gives the barren woman a home, making her the joyous mother of children. Praise the Lord." So in all the situations in the Bible where you see that women are barren, their different methods of trying to get themselves pregnant don't seem to work. But you can tell in several situations in the Bible, God is able to open the womb and God is able to close the womb. Here are four examples. Genesis 21 and 2, Sarah. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God had spoken to him. Second example, Genesis 25:21, Rebekah. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. Situation number 3, Leah. When Jacob came in from the field that evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come into me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he lay with her that night, and God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. And then with Rachel, Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened up her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach, and has called his name Joseph, saying, may the Lord add to me another son. So the issue here with infertility actually is happening on behalf of the Lord. So now we're going to take a look at Jacob's speckled cattle. In Genesis 30, 32 to 35, Jacob says, let me go through all your flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. These will be my wages. So my honesty will testify for me when you have come to check on my wages in the future. If I have given any goats that are not speckled or spotted, or any lambs that are not dark colored, they will be considered stolen. Agreed, said Laban. Let it be as you have said. That very day Laban removed all the streaked or spotted male goats and every speckled or spotted female goat, every one that had any white on it, and every dark colored lamb, and he placed them under the cares of his sons. So we have an agreement being made between Jacob and Laban tricks Jacob again. This time the way that Laban tricks Jacob is he takes the speckled cattle and gives them to his son, so when Jacob goes out there to find the speckled cattle, there's nothing there for him. Biblical Foundations has a very interesting article. I'm going to read an excerpt from it. We now know white to be dominant in sheep and all black to be recessive. While Laban immediately yanked all spotted sheep, goats, and cows not to give any animals to Jacob. So this means only the cows and sheep of a solid color, like the white and all black, would have been left in Jacob's care. However, in his haste to cheat Jacob out of any pay, what Laban failed to realize was what we know in genetics, that the dominant traits can mask the recessive traits of speckled and streaks. They are called heterozygotes. Excuse my pronunciation. This means every single one of the speckled and spotted were completely recessive, BB. Laban had simply removed all the pure recessives from the herd and left Jacob with the ones that only looked unspotted and unspeckled. 2/3 of the remainder of the herd still carried the recessive trait of the spotted and speckled, hidden by the dominant trait of all white. So the herds under Jacob's care had the genes for speckled and streaks. So God outsmarted Laban. Genesis 30, 32 to 35. And Jacob took him rods of green poplar and of the hazel and chestnut tree, and pilled white strakes in them, and made the white appear which was in the rods. And he set the rods which he had pilled before the flocks in the gutters in the watering troughs when the flocks came to drink, that they should conceive when they came to drink. And the flocks conceived before the rods, and brought forth cattle, ringstrakes, speckled, and spotted. So the next question is, what's the purpose of the stick? What the mother eats affects the offspring. This is from Duke University Medical Center. Some of the mothers consume supplements high in very simple molecular compounds that zip around the genome and turning off genes. One silenced gene was for yellow fur. When it is turned off, the mouse's fur color defaults to brown. For the mice, it wasn't just that you are what you eat, but you are what your mother ate too. So the mother and the mother's diet can affect what the children look like. They can change based on what the mother eats. Here's another example. This is from Molecular and Cellular Biology, August 2009, Dr. Robert Waterland and Randy Jertle, nutritionists at Duke University Medical Center. So same university. It's becoming unavoidable to conclude that there's something going on besides just genetics. In people, a forebear's diet can influence obesity, heart disease, high blood pressure, and diabetes. In mice, diet can influence body weight, blood pressure, even fur color. Because examples of this inheritance are only starting to emerge, scientists still don't know the full extent to which diet influences health, but they are starting to figure it out. They're starting to figure out how. So when they were doing their testing, here's a prime example. These female mice are genetically identical, yet a change in the diet of the pregnant and nursing mothers is the reason the mouse on the right is brown instead of yellow and thin instead of obese. So the stick played a role. The sticks were being chewed on by the mothers, and it affected their offspring. That's why he placed the stick by where they were going to drink. Overview of Genesis 30. Rachel is barren and gives Jacob her servant Bilhah, who bore his son Dan and Naphtali. Leah, who had ceased bearing children, gave her servant Zilpah to Jacob, who bore his son Gad, followed by Asher. Rachel asked for some of Reuben's mandrakes, allowing Leah to lay with Jacob in exchange, and she bore Issachar. So what's just interesting here is, to Rachel, it might have actually looked like the mandrakes were working, because chances are, when Reuben was picking up the mandrakes and bringing them to his mother Leah, Leah probably had the idea of consuming them. So both Leah and Rachel were probably using these to get pregnant. But obviously, when Rachel didn't get pregnant and Leah got pregnant, this probably scorned Rachel even more. Leah conceived again, and she bore Zebulun as well as a daughter named Dinah. God opened Rachel's womb, and she gave birth to Joseph. So at this point, Rachel's aware this has nothing to do with the mandrakes. This had to do with God's will. After the birth of Joseph, Jacob makes a request to Laban to go back to his home. So his home obviously is not in Paddan Aram, not in Haran. That's obviously where he traveled to. He wants to go back to the land of Canaan, where he came from. Remember, he was leaving from his angry brother Esau. Jacob made an agreement with Laban that he would take all the speckled and spotted cattle. That day, Laban had all the spotted cattle removed and given to his sons, and Jacob placed peeled sticks in front of the flocks which bred cattle that was speckled. Whenever the stronger cattle would breed, Jacob would place the sticks among them, and his wealth increased greatly. Genesis 31. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's. And from what was our father's, he has gained all his wealth. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So the land of Jacob's father was south in the land of Canaan, in Hebron and Shechem. So he was going to head back home. Originally, he was leaving from here because he was trying to, one, find a wife, but secondly, his brother was angry. Esau was angry because he stole his blessing and he stole his birthright. Genesis 31-20. And Jacob tricked Laban the Aramean, not telling him that he intended to flee. He fled with all that he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. So here we can see Jacob tricked Laban. So he's crossing the Euphrates and then he's going into Gilead. So Euphrates is actually right here where you see this red arrow. So he crossed the Euphrates and then made his way up to Gilead, which is above Damascus. And then you find that he was pursued. So Laban pursued him. Laban took him and his kinsmen with him, and he pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. So the reason that Laban was able to catch up with him, you can find a little bit later. But the reason was because Jacob is bringing his flocks, his wives, his children, and he has to move slower. And we can see that because when Esau met up with him, you're going to find a line in the Bible where Esau actually went forward and Jacob said, hey, I'm going to stay here with the wives, the children, and the cattle because they won't make it if we move too quickly. We'll cover that a little bit later. So this is the reason why he was able to pursue him. Of course, when Laban was pursuing him, he's just taking some of his men with him. He's not taking all of his possessions. Genesis 31-29. It is in my power to do you harm, says Laban. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. And now you have gone away because you have longed greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? So Laban didn't actually have a problem with Jacob leaving. He was obviously ticked off that Jacob just left without saying anything. But the real cause of contention here was the fact that the gods that Laban had in his home, they were missing. In Genesis 30-27, which is back a little bit, we see Laban say, but Laban said to him, if I have favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages and I will give it. So this should be a hint right here. Divination isn't something that's practiced by people who are following the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Laban was obviously following a different God. If we actually take a look at this word divination, divination showing up in this verse is the word nakash, and nakash means to observe signs, practice divination. We've looked at this before, though. When we look at this word nakash, nakash actually shows up a couple times in the Bible. So we've got 5:172 and 5:173. One is called an enchantment. The other one is to observe signs. But there's a third one. The third one is 5:175, and we see it for the first time in Genesis 3. In Genesis 3, when we see the word serpent, serpent is also nakash. So the divination that was practiced by Laban is the exact same Hebrew word as what we see in Genesis 3 when we encounter the word nakash. It's actually the second time in the Bible we encounter it. So when we look at the word serpent, or to practice divination, which is what we see Laban doing, or we see the word enchantment, we can see it's the exact same Hebrew letter. The only difference is the vowel points, and the vowel points wouldn't have existed until thousands of years later. So reading this in Hebrew, you would look at this, there was obviously an overlap between the word serpent and divination and enchantments. As a matter of fact, when you take a look at the word nakash, we're going to answer the question of where did these other gods and practices come from? We have to take a look at where Abraham was born. Abraham was born in the land of Ur. So Ur was part of Chaldea, and Chaldea, Babylon. So if I take a look, the first arrow on the right is Ur. This is where Abraham was born. Over here, this is Haran. Haran is the name of a city, but it's also the name of one of Abraham's brothers. So both of these areas actually reside within Babylon, Chaldea. So it's pretty safe to say that if they were practicing some other type of religion and had different gods, they'd be the gods of their local area. The gods of the local area would be the Babylonian gods. In Genesis 30-27, it says, at that time died, actually, I just realized this is in Genesis. I included a chunk here from the book of Jasher. So I'm going to read this to you. So this is in the book of Jasher. You will not find this in the book of Genesis. Please ignore the subtitle. At that time died Nahor. So Nahor is one of the relatives of Abraham, son of Surig, in the 49th year of the life of Abraham, son of Terah, and in the 50th year of the life of Abram, son of Terah. Abram came forth from the house of Noah and went to his father's house. And Abram knew the Lord, and he went in his ways and his instructions. And the Lord his God was with him. And Terah his father was in those days still captain of the host of King Nimrod, and still followed strange gods. So we can see the God of Abraham is different than the God of Abraham's father. And this would explain why you would see in Haran, for example, Laban having a set of different gods. We can see that Terah had a set of different gods. And Abram came to his father's house and saw 12 gods standing there in their temples. And the anger of Abram was kindled when he saw these images in his father's house. And Abram said, as the Lord liveth, these images shall not remain in my father's house. So shall the Lord who created me do unto me as if these 3 days' time I do not break them all. You can read the rest of this actually in the book of Jasher, but I just wanted to point out that this idea of other gods being worshipped in this area, you can find this actually going right back to Terah. And it makes sense because Terah knew or was the host of the King Nimrod, so you would kind of expect the family to be in the same direction, unless explicitly saying otherwise. So when we take a look at this word for divination, we see that it breaks down into learn by experience or diligently observe. And then it says to hiss. Now, to hiss is kind of interesting considering we saw the word nakash, which means serpent, is spelled exactly the same in Hebrew as divination. So when we look at to hiss, there must be something behind divination and something that reminds us of a serpent. And when we take a look and we see a whisper, a magic spell, it could be that when we talk about divination or enchanting, what we're doing is we're saying something under our breath. And if you notice, it says diligently observing. Well, diligently observing could be referring to meditation. And there are a lot of places in the East that have received a religion from Iran, Babylon, where they meditate and they also conduct enchantments, where they do quiet whisperings. They call them mantras. As a matter of fact, if we compare the word mantra, we can see a mantra is described like this. This is Gayatri mantras, vibration and influence on the physical body. It says silently thinking or speaking or chanting. The Gayatri mantra influences the physical body, clears the emotional body, leading one to the inner heart. To chant the Gayatri mantra purifies the chanter. To listen to the Gayatri mantra purifies the listener. So what's the key behind the mantra? Well, mantras involve silently thinking or speaking or chanting. Now compare this. Compare this to the word divination in the Bible. Learn by experience, diligently observe, whisper, hiss. You can see the overlap here. And one more piece, when we talk about hiss and we talk about the serpent, we know very well in the Indian religions or Oriental religions, if we're looking on the right-hand side here, this is an image of Shiva. If we look at Shiva, we can see around Shiva's neck, there is a serpent. Now, a serpent makes a hissing noise. We know that there is divination and enchanting and mantras practiced within Hinduism. And I also point out there is a sun behind Shiva's head, a crescent moon on top of his head. But of course, when we saw later in the Bible, when Moses in the Exodus leaves from Egypt, what did the people build? A golden calf. And if you look over the left shoulder of Shiva, you'll see a calf. You'll also find a cow in the Egyptian religion as well. The cow was called Hathor, and Hathor was a mother goddess. Jacob did not have the gods of Laban, but Rachel took them. So this whole situation where we have Laban following suit, and we find that Laban has a different set of gods, and those gods are missing, which is the whole reason he pursued Jacob. We find that Jacob didn't have the gods. Rachel was hiding them. She was hiding them under the saddle of a camel. Laban can't find these gods, and he has no reason to accuse Jacob after searching all of his tents. And so Laban makes a covenant, or Jacob makes a covenant with Laban. Laban requests the covenant because he doesn't want Jacob to cross a certain marker. If Jacob crosses that marker, he has to promise that he won't do any harm, and Laban promises the same. So basically, they won't cross paths with each other. So in Genesis 31, we saw that Jacob overheard the sons of Laban saying that Jacob had gained all of their father's wealth. Jacob saw Laban did not see him with the same favor, and the Lord told Jacob to return to the land of his home. Jacob tells Leah and Rachel of his plan to leave, as well as their father's treatment of him. Jacob fled to Gilead while Laban was shearing his sheep. Laban realized Jacob fled 3 days later, then pursued Jacob for 7 days and had a vision from the Lord. Laban confronts Jacob, asking why he fled, and tricked him, as well as took his gods. Jacob tells Laban he was afraid Laban would take Jacob's, I have a misspelling here. Jacob tells Laban he was afraid that Laban would take his daughters by force, and says anyone found to possess his gods will die. Laban searched the tents of Jacob and his wives, but Rachel hid the gods under her camel's saddle, so he found nothing. Laban and Jacob made a covenant that Jacob would not pass the heap of rocks and do him harm before returning home. Genesis 32. Genesis 32, 3-5. Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He instructed them, "You are to say to my master Esau, your servant Jacob says, I have been staying with Laban and I have remained there until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, men servants, and maidservants. I have sent this message to inform my master, so I may find favor in your sight." So Jacob goes from one problem to another problem. Problem number one is first he's fleeing Laban, and he has to deal with Laban, and they make their covenant. Now Jacob has his initial problem. The whole reason he fled to Haran in the first place was to find a wife, but also to escape his brother. Now he's going to see his brother for the first time in 20 years. The first time he was working for Laban was for 7 years. That was for Rachel, but instead he got Leah. And then he worked another 7 years for Rachel, and the other 6 years came from when he was tending to his sheep. So 20 years total. In Genesis 32, 7-8, in great fear and distress, Jacob divided his people into 2 camps, as well as the flocks and herds and camels. He thought, if Esau comes and attacks one camp, then the other camp can escape. So Jacob basically separated his possessions. He had the idea that he was going to send the gift forward, and the gift was going to be a series of cattle and servants. And then he thought that if he separated them into 2 groups and he sent the gift first, that he could maybe calm the anger of his brother. So his brother is coming from the south, coming towards the north, and then Jacob is going from the north, coming towards the south, and they're both going to meet in the land of Canaan. Genesis 32, 9-12. Then Jacob declared, "O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, the Lord who told me, go back to your country and to your kindred, and I will make you prosper. I am unworthy of all your kindness and faithfulness you have shown to your servant. Indeed, with only my staff I came across the Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid that he may come and attack me and my mothers and children with me. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper, and I will make your offspring like the sand of the sea, too numerous to count. So Jacob remembers the promise. He remembers the promise that was told to Abraham, to Isaac, and to himself, that he would father many children. So then at this point, Jacob crosses the Jabbok. In Genesis 32, 24 to 30, so Jacob was left alone, and there a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower Jacob, he struck the socket of Jacob's hip and dislocated it as they wrestled. Then the man said, Let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. What is your name? The man asked. Jacob, he replied. Then the man said, Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men, and you have prevailed. And Jacob requested, Please tell me your name. But he replied, Why do you ask me my name? Then he blessed Jacob there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, saying, Indeed, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared. So Jacob wrestles with an angel of the Lord. It's not very clear when you read it initially, but a little bit later, actually, in Genesis 35, you see this scene again. So if you remember, I told you the Bible isn't necessarily in chronological order. This scene in Genesis 35 is actually talking about the chapter we're reading right now. It says, After Jacob had reunited from Paddan Aram, God appeared to him again and blessed him. And God said to him, Though your name is Jacob, you will no longer be called Jacob. Instead, you will be Israel. So God named him Israel. And God told him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation, even a company of nations, shall come from you, and kings shall descend from you. The land I give to Abraham and Isaac I give to you, and I will give this land to your descendants after you. So you can tell this is the exact same conversation that we're seeing a couple chapters back. And in this case, it's not Jacob wrestling with a man. Jacob is wrestling with an angel of God. Once Jacob has stopped wrestling with God, he became Israel. You'll find this is quite common in the Bible. You'll find individuals who don't quite have their faith in God, or they know of the God of Israel, but they haven't fully accepted the God of Israel. You'll find at the moment in their life when they finally just submit and they give up and they say, okay, you're my God and I'll follow you and I'll be obedient. You'll find often their names become changed. A couple examples would be Saul and Paul. If you look in the New Testament, Paul was not originally a Christian. He went by the name Saul, and he actually persecuted the Christians. And then Saul had this vision on his way while going to another town, and he was blinded, and he received his vision when he went to the other town after stumbling upon Christ in the Spirit. So Paul was originally Saul, and then as he stopped wrestling with God, he became Paul. Another example would be Jacob. Jacob was renamed Israel. If we take a look at Abram became Abraham. So we have this consistent theme where we see names being changed when people stop wrestling with God. As a matter of fact, if you look in the book of Revelation, it also mentions that you will be given a new name. And it's talking about a white stone with a new name on it that only you would know. So here we take a look at this name, Peniel. And the reason why I bring this up is because if I don't bring this up, you'll probably hear this somewhere else and you'll have a question. Pineal is often referred to pineal, like the pineal gland. There are a lot of pagans that are trying to overlap this word pineal with the pineal gland within the head, because they're actually trying to merge together two religions. So they're trying to actually take mysticism and mix it with Christianity. There is no connection to this word pineal and the pineal gland. This word pineal, where Jacob had this vision, or where Jacob wrestled with God and had the vision of Jacob's ladder, this comes from words panem and El. El we've seen before. El has to do with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He shows himself as El Shaddai, Elohim, Eloah, and here we can see that Peniel is coming from El and Panem. So Panem means face, and El is the name of the God. So it's the face of God. There's absolutely no connection here to the pineal gland. When pagans try to take that line out of context and they try to get people to believe that the Bible is trying to get you to open your third eye, there's a second verse that they will give you. I saw this one in the Rosicrucian order. Matthew 6:22. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. So they take these two verses out of context. They claim that this has to do with the pineal gland, and then they try to push Christians towards what's called Christian mysticism. And there's no such thing. So, overview of Genesis 32. As Jacob returned, he sent servants ahead with gifts for his brother Esau, who was living in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Jacob was afraid his brother was still angry with him, so he split his servants into camps in case Esau took one of the others and could escape. Jacob prayed to God for deliverance from Esau and sent one camp with his present ahead of him. After crossing the ford of Jabbok, Jacob was alone and wrestled a man. Jacob's hip was dislocated, but he refused to let go until he was blessed. The angel blessed him and named him Israel at Peniel. Genesis 33. In Genesis 33, we see Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two female servants. And he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah and her with her children, and then Rachel and Joseph last of all. So you can see here how he positioned his wives and his children. He's basically using them as a wall to calm his brother. But he wanted to put them first so they could prostrate themselves. But secondly, in the case that his brother was still wrath with him, he put Joseph and Rachel near the back. So you can see that favoritism again. Esau and Jacob reconcile, to Jacob's amazement. So this is the route that Esau took and the route that Jacob took. So Jacob was coming up from the north. So Jacob came down from here, and we see this word Succoth. Succoth we know is a holy day. It has to do with tents, and we know that Jacob had set up a tent after crossing the Jabbok. And then down here from the south, this is where Esau was coming from with his men, and they also came towards the Jabbok. In Genesis 33, 1-2, then Esau said, "Let us journey on our way, and I will go ahead of you." But Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the nursing flocks and the herds are a care to me. If they are driven hard for one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly, at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me, and at the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir." So as you can see, he's moving a lot slower, because in one situation, you can see Jacob's bringing all of his possessions, his wives and his children and his cattle. And Esau's just bringing his men with him. So very different situation in regards to how fast they can move. We saw the same thing with Laban, which is the whole reason Laban was able to pursue him. Overview of Genesis 33. Jacob sees Esau coming with 400 men and positions his wives, servants, and children with Joseph in the back before going ahead of them. Esau embraced Jacob, wept, and Jacob offered his gift of cattle to Esau. Esau continued back to Seir, and Jacob took the weaker cattle and children to the camp of Succoth before making their way back to Shechem. In Shechem, Jacob bought land from the sons of Hamor, that's Shechem's father, and there he created an altar, El Olui Israel. So if you notice here, we're seeing this constant theme of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If you look really carefully when you're reading the book of Genesis, you're seeing they keep using this word El. Their altars are set up to El. Genesis 34. The rape of Dinah. Genesis 34, 1-2. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully. So the next thing we see going on here is after Dinah is raped, we see Shechem and we see his father Hamor. They come to Jacob and his sons, and they try to not necessarily fix the situation, but what the desire was is that Shechem wanted to actually marry Dinah. And so Hamor and Shechem were basically speaking to Jacob and his sons to make that kind of a deal. So this is what we're reading about in Genesis 34, 13-16. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to them, "We cannot do this thing, to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become as we are by every male among you being circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will make your daughters to ourselves, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people." But of course, Jacob's sons didn't actually mean what they said. So if we take a look here, we can see Jacob's two sons from Leah, Simeon and Levi. This is the second oldest son and the third oldest son. On the third day, when they were sore, so the two sons knew that circumcision on the third day would cause a great deal of pain and that the men wouldn't be ready for battle. So what they had planned was they were going to deceive the Hamor and Sheshem and basically have them agree to circumcision and then come and attack them when they were weakened. So on the third day, when they were sore, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city while it was secure and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Sheshem with the sword and took Dinah out of Sheshem's house and went away. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because they had defiled their sister. There's actually more details you can read about this in the book of Jasher. It's in chapter 33 and 34, and there's quite a bit more because it's a whole 2 chapters just on this one event. In Genesis 34, we see that Sheshem, the son of Hamor, saw Dinah, fell in love with her, and then raped her, asking his father to make her his wife. Jacob and his sons heard Dinah had been defiled, and Hamor requested of them for Dinah to be his son Sheshem's wife. The sons of Jacob agreed under the pretense that all the men first be circumcised, and Sheshem agreed. On the third day after the men had all been circumcised, Levi and Simeon came with swords and killed Hamor and Sheshem, as well as all the other men. Jacob then worried that the people of the land will now destroy him for what he had done. Remember that Jacob and his family aren't from Canaan. The Lord told him to go to Canaan and live in the land of Gerar. And now that they're living in the land of Gerar, and they're living amongst the Philistines, and they're living amongst the Hittites, now that his two sons had slayed the king of Sheshem and Hamor, he was concerned that the rest of the land would turn on him. Genesis 35. The altar at Bethel. So this is actually the altar at Bethel, or where they believe it was today. It's actually a tourist site. The tourist site is located right here on the map. So if you take a look above Hebron, these are the coordinates to the tourist site. This was supposedly where Jacob had seen the angels ascending and descending the ladder, and Jacob's ladder was the exact same place, which was Peniel, where Jacob had wrestled with God. Those were the same place. Those were both in Bethel. So the same location of Jacob's ladder is the same area where Jacob had wrestled with the angel, and these were both in Bethel. Genesis 28, 18 and 19. So in the early morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil upon it. And he called the name of it Bethel. But the name of the city was Luz at first. So Luz was the name of what it was when the Canaanites had resided there. Rachel has Benjamin near Ephrath. Ephrath is also known as Bethlehem. There's some controversy over where Bethlehem is today. There's actually a couple spots on the map, but Bethlehem is south of Bethel. So this area called Ephrath or Bethlehem, this was just a little bit south of Bethel. So Jacob has his second child with Rachel now. The first child, remember, Rachel was barren for a very long time. She eventually has Joseph when the Lord opens her womb, and now she has her second child almost at Bethlehem, and this child is Benjamin, or Ben-Ammi. Isaac dies in Mamre at 180 years old. In Genesis 35:29, and Isaac breathed his last, and he died and was gathered to his people, old and full of days, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. The question is, where did they bury him? We know they buried him in Mamre, but it doesn't specifically say whether or not he was buried at Machpelah with his ancestors. However, in Genesis 49, 30 to 31, we do grab that detail, which is a little bit later. The cave is in the field of Machpelah, near Mamre, in the land of Canaan. This is the field Abraham purchased from Ephron the Hittite as a burial site. There, Abraham and his wife Sarah are buried. There, Isaac and his wife Rebekah are buried. And there, I buried Leah. So this is Jacob talking here, and we'll see that a little bit later once we reach Genesis 49. But here we can see that it doesn't explicitly say in this chapter that Isaac was buried in Machpelah, but in Genesis 49, we can see, yes, he was buried in Machpelah. So Genesis 35, God tells Jacob to build an altar in Bethel to God who appeared when he fled from Esau. And we saw this in Genesis 28:13, Jacob's ladder. Jacob tells his household to put away their foreign gods, purify themselves, and to change their garments before leaving to build the altar. So before Jacob builds his altar to God, these foreign gods that Rachel had stolen and put under the camel, he told them to do away with those, purify themselves before building the altar. As they journeyed, a terror from God fell upon the cities around them that they did not pursue Jacob. So remember, Jacob's fear was because his sons had killed Shechem and Hamor, that the whole land would turn against him. But after they had disposed of these foreign gods, built an altar to the real God, there was a terror that fell upon the people of the land where they didn't bother to pursue Jacob. Jacob came to Luz, which is Bethel, and built the altar called El Bethel. Again, notice El. We keep seeing this word El that shows up. When we're dealing with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they always used the name El. This name, Lord, Yahweh, Jehovah, this crept up later. God revealed himself there, fleeing Esau. God appears to Jacob again on his way back from Paddan Aram and blesses him with the name Israel. Additional details relating to Genesis 32:28. So again, even when we look at the name Israel, when we look at the word Israel, we can see that word El again. It's right at the end of the word. When we look at the word Peniel, we had the word El at the end of the word. When we look at Jesus, Jesus was known as Emmanuel. We saw El at the end of the word. We saw Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob knowing God by the name of El Shaddai. We had Eloah and we had Elohim. As they left from Bethel, Rachel went into labor to give birth to Ben-Oni, which his father renamed as Benjamin, and died in Bethlehem, Ephrath, where he was buried. So if we take a look here, Bethel, just another example, Bethel, again, we get that L on the end of it. Israel then pitched his tent beyond the Tower of Eder, and Reuben slept with Bilhah, his father's concubine. So there's a little bit more to the story. Actually, there's a book called The 12 Patriarchs. I think it's called Testimony of the Patriarchs. Basically what happens is a father dies, he would bless his sons. This book called The 12 Patriarchs deals with each one of the 12 sons and the blessing and the lesson that the father tried to teach them before they died. So the blessing that was given to Reuben and the teaching was that Reuben had learned that alcohol is something that did not really agree with him. Reuben was actually drunk when he slept with Bilhah, his father's concubine. That's a piece you don't get from the Old Testament, but you do get it from some of the other writings, the Deuterocanonical writings. So Reuben, his downfall was alcohol. We see a list of Israel's children from his 2 wives and 2 concubines, and then Isaac dies at Mamre at 180 years of age and was buried by his sons Jacob and Esau. And we know that he was buried in the same place as the rest of his ancestors at Machpelah, which we discover in Genesis 49.
For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Brothers and sisters, the sword is coming. If you hear the watchman's call, please repent and seek out Jesus Christ. There is still time. That at the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow.